Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's finish up our look at the United Kingdom. A little political evolution. After World War II, basically the government gets together and says we need to provide womb to tomb coverage, a lot of social services, government intervention, full employment. This is kind of like the government becomes more nationalized, not like dictatorial, but the government is really getting involved in people's lives to try to make their lives better. Doesn't necessarily work like it expect. Margaret Thatcher comes to power in 1979. You get what's called Thatcherism. So you welfare state, focus on lower taxes, more privatization, reduced safety nets. And then in 1997 with Tony Blair, you get the third way, basically a compromise between the collectivist consensus and Thatcherism. So kind of social equality, but fiscal more conservatism. And then we have the recent political evolution that is post Brexit UK. You have this rise in nationalism, very anti immigrant sentiment, and a lot of the results and impacts from leaving the European Union, and especially the economic impacts that are coming post COVID as well. So we have a two-party dominant system in the United Kingdom. There are multiple parties, but two parties are pretty much run things, very much like the United States. These two parties or the political party structure is based on two things: class and region. So we look at the dominant parties. The two big ones are Labor and the Conservatives. Conservatives are also known as they are the catch-all left and right parties. A catch-all party, otherwise known as a big tent party, is a political party that has a really wide scope of ideas and attempt to bring in as many voters as possible. They're usually around the middle ground of the country. So Labor is your catch-all party on the left, and the Conservatives are catch-all party on the right. Labor more working class, Conservatives more upper class. The Liberal Democrats are also based on social equality, but also economic freedom, and so they're kind of a centrist party. And then the Greens are this environmental social justice party. Neither one is really huge. There's also the regional parties. We have the Scottish National Party, which is very pro Scotland. We have Plaid Cymru, who's very pro Welsh. Both Scottish are actually the third largest party. Pro Welsh is very small. And we have the Democratic Unionists that are pro UK unification with Northern Ireland, having Northern Ireland remain part of the UK. And then on the other side, you have Sinn Féin, which is the political party that's really big into Irish nationalism and the unification with the Republic of Ireland. Now, how does this look in the House of Commons, which is the most important in the UK? Obviously, the Conservatives currently hold power. You can see the Scottish Nationalists third. Notice Sinn Féin is absent. They have 7 seats, but they refuse to take them. They see the government. How do people like the parties? Labor is definitely growing. It's assumed that in the next election, Labor is probably government. Let's talk about the UK in terms of recent issues. One, we got to remember that the UK is a dying empire. They used to be the most powerful empire on the planet, almost had a third or quarter of the globe, and now they're not even the most important country in all, probably. So then the question becomes things like, all right, how do we deal with Brexit? What happens with the monarch and all the controversy of the monarchs? And how do we deal with devolving power to Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland? What about immigration? What about economic stagnation? So let's start with a little bit of the class issue. This is number one problem in the UK is class. And this is GDP per capita. And if you notice, it's huge around London. You also have like Cambridge and Oxford that are just to the north. But when you start getting the further north into where you'd get the more industrial base, the mining bases, GDP per capita goes down by over half. And so the question becomes, this is the lower class part of the country. This is the upper class part of the country. The South actually has a considerably large tech corridor, and it's growing, but it's a very small country, and you can't have this kind of disparity and not have economic problems. Now, there is a philosophy in the UK known as noblesse oblige. It's this obligation of those of the high status, high class are supposed to um, treat those underneath them with kind of this kindness, honor, and gentleness. And so this is where the concept of the collectivist consensus comes in. Basically, in 1942, you have a report that says that you should basically give womb to tomb government coverage of people and you have these huge social safety nets. And of course, the number one social safety net in the UK is the National Health Service. This is the, people call it free healthcare, but it's not free. Obviously, the government is paying for it, but it is the pride and joy of the United Kingdom that you have the ability to get healthcare from the government. You do have private healthcare available, but you would have to pay for it through insurance as well. Problem is, the healthcare system is not doing well right now, and this is eroding the legitimacy of the UK government. Wait times to see people have gone up considerably. The number of doctors in the UK has dropped considerably because the UK is suffering from economic problems. And of course, if that occurs, then you got to, you know, pay doctors less, reduce services. This is a huge problem right now is that there's an economic class gap, and a lot of those social safety nets in the UK, because of a bad economy, are starting to erode. And how do you deal with that? Huge issue. Um, in 2009, you had what was known as austerity because you had the Great Recession. Austerity is massive cuts to reduce the deficit, the debt on the government. And when this occurred, you had billions of dollars in spending cuts, and this really hurts countries that depend on that social safety net. Actually led to riots when they tried to increase the tuition of going to college. You had probably 2 weeks worth of rioting where you had a lot of damage done to local businesses, cars. There was a lot of vandalism and okay? To, help alleviate some of these problems, the UK goes to Quangos. Quangos are quasi-autonomous non-governmental organizations. So they basically like outsource things like rail or some education, job training, some housing, building of roads. Instead of the government doing all these tasks, they'll start to kind of outsource them to some private sectors. The government still oversees everything going on, but the Quangos are more specialized, because governments primarily govern. They don't really build things or know how to do that. So Quangos are slowly taking some of this private sector expertise and trying to make things more efficient on making sure it works, or on the local level than on issue number two is immigration. UK has an immigration problem just like anywhere else in the world. A lot of it is around here. This is the 20 teens when you get a lot of Syrians and North Africans coming in after a lot of attempted brutal wars and civil conflicts. And of course, that led to an enormous amount of protest, especially in England. And a lot of people think this is why Brexit actually happened. And of course, what is Brexit? This is the European Union. It is most European countries. It is a supranational organization. So it's a collection of European countries where you had free trade, free movement between countries. You need passports. Countries had a common currency, that is the euro. Well, um, you also had to follow a lot of common laws and common trading policies. And the UK did not like to do that. And so the UK is no longer part of the European Union. The vote to do that was called Brexit. And the vote was a referendum. So the people actually voted to leave the European Union, 52% to 48%. This is Nigel Farage. He was a member of a very far right party that advocated for it. And no one was really expecting this to happen until about 2 or 3 days before the election, but that is what Brexit is the UK leaving. And now you have immigration is continued to be a problem. This huge gap or spike here is people from Hong Kong and Ukraine migrating more into UK. The next problem in the UK is economic stagnation. This is GDP since 2019. If you notice, it kind of has been basically flat. You haven't had any positive. This is COVID, but you haven't had any positive GDP growth, and that means the country is not prosperous. Almost every other country in the modern developed world has seen their overall GDP go up with one exception, and that is the UK. This is 2023 and 2024 anticipated. And a lot of people wondering, well, what is going on in the UK? Why is it that they cannot get their GDP up? Because even when you're looking at like incomes, this is the UK right here, this dark blue line. Like everybody's dropped during the Great Recession, but then they just haven't seemed to be able to climb their way out of it, like Germany or France or Austria. And what a lot of people are looking at now is remember, this is C plus I plus G plus NX, consumer spending, investment, government spending, and net exports. And we look at this investments. Remember, investments are big time purchases by companies to make sure their overall country, excuse me, their overall company is investing in the future. The UK has some of the worst business investments. It's just really hard to do business in the UK for a variety of reasons, including regulations. So you have this economic stagnation. Businesses aren't investing in the country, resulting, of course, in less taxes and therefore more cuts in social safety nets and services. This is why you have the GDP per capita problem, the class distinction here. The devolution or independence. What do we do? Do we just devolve power to places like Scotland or Northern Ireland? Um, Scotland actually tried to pass a referendum to leave in 2014. Scottish were the only ones that voted, and Scots said no, they don't really want to leave. Before Brexit, though, and now a lot more Scots want to leave because they would like to be a part of the European Union. And the Scottish National Party, very big in Scotland for the Scottish Parliament. So Scottish independence is a legitimate movement up there. Northern Ireland is also an issue. You have elements of Northern Ireland that are in favor of staying with the UK. You have elements of Northern Ireland that want to come back and be a part of Ireland. That has resulted in violence in the past, including significant violence during the 70s and 1980s. And we'll get into that more as we're going along. We have economic stagnation, we have immigration, we have class differences, and then we have, the results of Brexit, and finally, about what do we do about these nations that exist in the UK: Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales.